Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Now You See Me, starring Jesse Eisenberg, Mark Ruffalo, Woody Harrelson, Melanie Laurent, Ela Fisher, Dave Franco, Michael Caine, and Morgan Freeman, directed by Louis Leterrier. Now, I remember going to theaters for this, and will it be the same as I think of it now? Let's figure this out and teach this magic trick to everybody in the world. Let's get into it. We get introduced to our magician characters, starting with J. Daniel Atlas, played by Jesse Eisenberg, asking a woman to pick a card, and she picks 7, which happens to not be there, as he puts it on a building in Chicago. And I saw the 7 in the pile of cards as it felt a little obvious. While in New Orleans, we meet Merritt McKinney, played by Woody Harrelson, as he tests a corrupt married couple as he tests about a situation on a business trip with the man's wife's sister's named Janet in New York. And in New York City, Jack Wilder bent a spoon with a trick while on a ferry and hands $100 to someone who catches it, and someone catches it, and Jack steals his wallet as well as gives him $100. And in Los Angeles, Henley Reeves, played by Borat's wife, or ex-wife, excuse me, Ela Fisher, tries to get out of a box of water, or else some piranhas will eat her up. And they do, and she tricks them while they have a watcher, and we never see his face until the end of the movie, which I'll save it until then. And they find a card that leads them somewhere in New York City, and go there to meet each other and become the Four Horsemen. And the characters I like fine, but Daniel comes off rather unlikable as he sounds typical Jesse Eisenberg, which can be annoying after a while, but it worked in The Social Network, but it doesn't work here as the others are likable, but he's not. 1 year later, the Four Horsemen are in Las Vegas performing in the MGM Grand, and with their manager Arthur Tressler, played by Michael Caine, and the audience with Thaddeus Bradley, played by Morgan Freeman, who's an observer as the horseman and picks a random person on section B, row 5, seat 13, as they perform robbing a bank by picking a Frenchman. As they perform a trick in a clever way, as that was clever for sure, and the cinematography looked fine, but not my favorite in my opinion. The next day, Detective Dylan Rhodes, played by Mark Ruffalo, is called in because of the magic robbery, and is forced to work with a French policewoman, Alma Dre, played by Melanie Laurent from Inglourious Basterds. As they interrogate the Four Horsemen and the Frenchman, as he is unfortunately useless because he was hypnotized as he pretends to play violin after a trigger word, which is the word BS, let's just say. And they interrogate the Four Horsemen, and Alma takes it like a cop while Dylan comes off like a hard ass. Until eventually they let the Four Horsemen go because the cops have eventually nothing and are on the way to New Orleans. And Dylan goes along with Alma, and the acting in this is kind of good. And I believe the actors are the characters, except for Jesse Eisenberg, who comes off rather one note. The FBI get to Thaddeus as he dethrones magicians as he used to be a magician himself, and Dylan and Alma talk with him before going to New Orleans behind the Four Horsemen as they go to the stage with no one in it, and he shows them how the Frenchman got to Paris and learns their trick with them selecting the seat and bumping into him in Paris on purpose, which is in France, by the way, if anybody doesn't know that, which I'm pretty sure everybody does, but let's move on. And what confused me was how they used the trick, which I guess is not a bad thing for a magician movie. And it is entertaining me from the start all the way to the finish. While the horsemen fly to New Orleans, they practice just for a show on Arthur. Well, Dylan learns a little bit about magic, and they arrive to New Orleans during Mardi Gras. And I've been to New Orleans during Mardi Gras, as it was kind of cool, but I'm not too familiar with Mardi Gras, except they celebrate it there and the colors are purple and green. And I like how they show the crowds in Mardi Gras, as it can be crowded at that point in time. While Thaddeus is visited by Arthur to bribe him from exposing the Four Horsemen, but he refuses. And the two legends, since together since the Dark Knight trilogy was not as great as in the Dark Knight trilogy. And by definition, I'm talking about Michael Caine and Morgan Freeman. Thaddeus visits the Four Horsemen while they believe he's exposing them. And I always liked Morgan Freeman as one of the villains of this movie. And he'll be back in the third movie, and he's back in the second movie. What am I talking about? Like Michael Caine will be back in the second movie, but he retired after sometime after the second movie, I would say. While they prepare for the show, so I think he's not going to be in the third one, is what my point is. While they prepare for the show, as he's in the audience with Dylan and Alma, and the show begins with 12 lucky people playing the magic trick of football as they tackle the quarterback when the FBI comes in to attack the Horsemen. But that will come in a second as they perform magic tricks throughout the show, and they rob Arthur by calling him on stage and giving the audience all of his money. And Arthur is pissed at the Horsemen, and this is a very entertaining movie, and I like the shots in New Orleans as it looks pretty good. The FBI shouts freeze after the Four Horsemen perform all their magic tricks, and they escape as Dylan and Alma go after them, and they get closer to Daniel, but he escapes anyways because Alma doesn't shoot at him, which is something that cops should be doing in real life, but instead some of them just shoot first and ask questions later. Not all, but some, which is a terrible thing for a cop to do, generally speaking. And the other horsemen get away from the cops, and the action sequences were somewhat convincing in my opinion, and Dylan gets a drink with Alma coming and getting him while he's drunk, and he doesn't bring him back, and Thaddeus and Arthur talk about how to expose the Four Horsemen for tricking Arthur, and their scene was entertaining, as this is a very entertaining movie, and it's a good time for a magician movie. Dylan wants to know what he saw at the bar with the drawing of an eyeball, and looks at her book as she awakens, and they talk about it as the FBI gets tracked by the Horsemen as they track them down by Daniel taking Dylan's phone. And the Horsemen have a plan to stick with as they take some evidence and burn it as they leave, except for Jack, who fights Dylan off and wins the fight and doesn't save Fuller's life. And every move Dylan makes kind of makes him look like an ass, while Alma sticks behind as he's too stupid to realize how the magic trick works, while Alma steals a car and picks up Dylan and has a conversation at the wrong time and drive away. And I'm like, oh, come on with that. Really? With this crap? Alma and Dylan go after Jack in a black car and have a not so spectacular chase sequence, in my opinion, as Jack crashes and disappears in the car explosion, which didn't look good, as the other horsemen remain unknown of their whereabouts, and Thaddeus calls Dylan and says Alma was a desk agent while he might be part of the magic trick. And the FBI believes they'll find the other horsemen in Queens, New York, and Dylan is off the case, and the horsemen deliver a message to the world to help them finish their mission as they take another vault of money in the most clever way possible, as this movie is fun but not great. Dylan sees their mission on YouTube, and they get to their show in Queens, and they get to the Thaddeus, and he says they look like bigger idiots than they look, as he's filming on how the FBI look like idiots. And their show begins on a building in Queens as they're filming like they were in the Hunger Games. And I'm no expert on cameras, but that's a trick I like to learn to film virtually live. And the FBI goes the wrong way while Alma and gets Dylan in the right direction, while Merritt confesses Daniel he was a pain in the ass when meeting Daniel, as he thought he was a dick, as the FBI used mannequins of them, and their magic tricks come to an end, and they say their goodbyes to the world by disappearing with Dylan almost shooting at them. Instead, money comes popping away, and that was a clever trick. And I'm getting to the twist at this point in the next sentence. Dylan and Alma smooch after he said she was right about everything, and the horsemen, but their faces are on the money, and the real money is in Thaddeus' car, and they exposed him. And based on the character, it felt obvious he's put in a jail cell, and he says he's been framed, and he confesses how they did it, with Jack and Dylan exposing the twist as he was involved in all of this, which felt too obvious. He was the mystery man, and Dylan was the mystery man behind in the beginning of the movie as he meets the Four Horsemen in a carnival. and says he's the big brain of it all, and he recruits the horsemen to the Eye. And Dylan visits Alma in France, where the locks are at, and throws his key in the water, and Alma decides to not turn in Dylan. And the climax was pretty obvious if you paid attention to the beginning of the movie. Like, I did my best at it, as Dylan was the one who hired them from the beginning, which makes it a good magic trick. But how good was this magic trick? Let's talk about it. I'll give this movie a 6.0 out of 10. I like the characters just fine, but Jesse Eisenberg comes off like typical Jesse Eisenberg, as he was one note, which can be annoying after a while, which works perfectly in The Social Network, but it doesn't work here, as the others are likable, and the actors are likable in their roles. And the cinematography looked fine, but not my favorite in my opinion, as the magic tricks they do are clever. This did entertain me from start to finish, as the twist was clever, but at the same time a little obvious, as there were times this movie was a little too obvious to predict. And even if you've seen this a few times like I have, but in my opinion, this tells me this is somewhat not rewarding for repeat viewings, because you've learned the magic. If you've learned the magic, there's not to know what's coming next, but that's not fair to the movie, which feels like a problem for the movie in my opinion. Was the action scenes convincing? Somewhat. And I like seeing Morgan Freeman and Michael Caine back together since the Dark Knight trilogy, as they come back for the sequels. Michael Caine, not so much the third movie, because he's retired now. And this is a recommendation for the movie. And does this need to be a trilogy? Absolutely not, as it works as for a standalone movie. But the Mardi Gras scene in New Orleans was great to have a flashback to, which is something I didn't say for the show, but it is true. But the shots are very good in New Orleans, and is this the best? And at best, this movie was fun, not great, but it's a good time to be had at the movies. And is this the best movie ever made? Not by all means, but it works as a magician movie. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me for this review, and next time I will be back with Now You See Me Too. And until then, now you see me, now you don't.